Feedback. Use it or lose it. Reject it at your peril. I love feedback. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I hate it. Use it or lose it. Reject it at your peril, because feedback is one of the most powerful tools you have. So why do people run away from it? Refuse to listen to it, ignore it, and some people even fear it. It doesn't make sense when it can be so powerful. I was playing golf and this guy kept saying to himself, I am useless, I am useless, I am useless. I haven't played well for a long time, I'm just useless. I took him aside and said, are you aware you are programming yourself with your own negative words? Change the words and watch the difference. The next day he scored 6 under his handicap, a huge shift. He listened and it worked. That's how powerful feedback can be. I took a risk because most people have a problem with feedback, and in this case it was worth it. Everybody wants something, even people who say they don't. They really do. Every single human being is naturally driven by their values and beliefs, which can mean forwards or standing still. People strive towards what they want, which can be somewhere between success and preferring to play safe. Why then do we have such a big problem with feedback, when feedback is how we learn what works and what doesn't? Feedback is an essential ingredient of communication. Communication is the fuel that gets you what you want through relationships. Feedback and disclosure are the keys to building relationships. Take your time to look up the Johari window, that's spelt Johari window, on Google, because it is a great model designed to help people better understand their relationship with themselves and others, and you will find plenty of information explaining how feedback and disclosure consolidate relationships. This video focuses on receiving and giving feedback. Feedback is a vital part of listening, which will be the topic for my next video. My definition of feedback is someone giving their version of something which is true for them but may or may not be true for you. Let me repeat that. Someone giving their version of something which is true for them but may or may not be true for you. On my workshops, participants are encouraged to write feedback on every participant. I tell them to write what works for them and what doesn't about their fellow participants. I also provide tips on how to phrase their feedback. The feedback is then collected every so often and passed to the people it concerns. Over 20 years, I have learned that most people don't know how to give feedback. Some people on my workshops must be continuously encouraged to write something, anything. 90% of feedback is poorly phrased. Many participants demonstrate limited observation and discernment skills. When you live in a world that suggests you receive in relationship to what you give, it doesn't make sense then to shy away from positive acknowledgements, which is also feedback and costs you nothing. I believe feedback should be genuine, not something you do because you've been told it brings rewards. Authenticity is essential if you have any integrity. Most people can see through you when it isn't genuine, although they won't feed that back to you. They will still feel it. On one of my workshops, the participants play a game which I invented to stimulate communication and listening. They must score each person's communication throughout the game. During the game, many demonstrate their lack of discipline when it comes to listening. After the game, I analyze their scoring and often find a complete lack of discernment in the other participants' communication abilities. Some scoring tells me that quite a few participants have very low self-esteem, while others clearly overrate themselves. The level of scoring is often really poor, and most people seem to think everybody communicates at the same level, which most of us know is obviously not true. How can people learn and develop when people are incapable or scared to give honest feedback in a supportive way? I'll repeat that because I believe it is so important. How can people learn and develop when people are incapable or scared to give honest feedback in a supportive way? I once had to feedback to a client about his scoring. He gave himself 9 out of 9 every time he answered a question. He gave his fellow players 5 or less out of 9. Interestingly, he also gave the women less points than the men. I fed this information to him and asked him if his communication was 100% effective every time. He got what I was telling him and he took it well. In the second game, his scoring changed completely and was more in alignment with the other players in his game and my observation. From the beginning to the end of all my workshops, the direction I take is dictated by the feedback I get and observe. Whenever I speak to an audience, the feedback is important because it helps me maintain a direction that works with the audience, and they don't know this is happening. You can easily detect when a speaker is losing their audience because they aren't observing the feedback and don't realize they have to reconnect, assuming they connected at the beginning anyway. The opposite is obvious as well. When a speaker clearly picks up the feedback and works with it, then we get a good speech. The funny thing is, participants on my workshop love the feedback and rate it as one of the best things about the workshop. I'm often asked by them to give more specific feedback all through the course. This happens because a safe environment has been created for them to explore themselves, and they begin to see the value of feedback for themselves. Feedback truly is important and valuable. We are all receiving feedback every second of the day. It may be through our eyes, ears, nose, thoughts, sense and feelings. It is non-stop, and we couldn't possibly attend to it all because we would go insane. We just couldn't cope. Fortunately, our brain does most of the filtering for us automatically. Actually, they are now saying our brain is capable of handling everything that comes at us. But we are a long way from developing that ability yet. If you want to change anything in your life, then you must learn to listen to feedback. Learn the skills required to let it sink in, regardless of what you think of it or do with it. You must first learn to hear it. This is far easier than you think, but it takes a little bit of practice. Let me share with you some feedback experiences. A long time ago, I was facilitating groups of long-term unemployed for the government. Each week, every participant had to complete a job action plan. One day, one person said at the beginning of a workshop that they will never, ever work. I didn't respond at all. I facilitated the workshop as usual, giving it 100%. At the end, I read the evaluations, and this person had written, "I am going to work for the rest of my life." Amazing. I learned by accepting what they said and not paying any attention to it, I had achieved a better result than expected. I never know how people will respond to my communication, and this should never prevent me giving 100%. At the beginning of my workshops, I always explain how the workshops are run. I tell the participants there are no lectures. I explain the workshop is run experiential style and they are the content. I tell them they will learn from each other. I tell them I am the facilitator who creates situations from which they will learn about themselves, from each other and me. This is also clearly explained in the pre-course marketing, assuming they read it. I also say if they want lectures, they should go home now. Nobody has ever left. I also tell them at least one person will say on their feedback that they wanted more lectures. Because of this, I always go overboard to ensure every single person is clear about the workshop and how it is run. Oh yes, you guessed it. Often one person puts more lectures on their evaluation. You can never guarantee how people will listen and whether your communication will always be effective. And some people are predictable. I must be getting better though, because I've noticed this rarely happens now. I have been running these workshops for more than 15 years and I get very high evaluation scores. I stopped being disappointed by the odd bad score long ago because I know it will not make an indent into my average score over the years. Their scores and comments are telling me more about them. It may help them if I point this out, but they are usually gone by the time I read their evaluations. What every person must understand is that feedback says as much about the person giving it, but is not necessarily accurate about the person they are giving it to. On another workshop, there was someone who was 25 years in human resources as a manager. They learned about their inability to smile from their fellow participants. At the end of the workshop, this person shared this with the whole group with a huge smile on their face. 3 months after the workshop, they emailed me to say the smile was now a habit and their world had changed for the better. A simple change can make a huge difference, and it came from feedback. The thing about feedback is to tell people how it is for you or what you observe. Sometimes it makes sense to first ask if you can say something because people do have difficulty listening to feedback. Asking is one way to create listening. I often get people at golf telling me what I should be doing and not what I am doing. How does anybody know what works for me unless they know me and my golf really well, or if they are my coach? Yes, tell them what you see, but never tell people what they should be doing because you don't know what will work for them. At the end of my workshops, people often ask me how they should deal with a certain situation of theirs. I always tell them, I don't know because I am not God. I ask them questions and give them questions to consider, but refuse to tell them what to do because I don't know. It is just as important for me to remember my feedback is true for me, but not necessarily true for them. When you give feedback, you must own it. For example, you are not making sense becomes, I didn't understand what you said. Or, your behavior is annoying me becomes, I am feeling uncomfortable. Or, you are late becomes, can you be on time next time? Or, you are terrific becomes, I love it. I love you. Yes, positive feedback is also very powerful when you deliver from the I. Own your feedback. So important. I am sure you appreciate what I'm saying here. Always own what you say. This might seem silly or pointless, but I can assure you it is very powerful. Now, receiving feedback is really simple. You must understand feedback is one person's view and no more. It may or may not be true for you. If it upsets you, then it is possibly something you might want to investigate further. On my workshops, I make it very clear that one person's feedback says more about them than you. If two people say the same, then it is a possibility, and three or more becomes a strong probability, which you might want to investigate further, especially if you have a negative reaction. I always recommend writing down feedback in your journal, and if the same feedback is coming at you on a regular basis, then there is a high likelihood of some truth in it. The question is, do you want people to experience you that way or not? If you don't, do something about it. I repeat, if the feedback is negative and you don't want people to think this about you, then change, see a coach, or do whatever it takes. Now, if it is positive and you have a reaction, then get used to it. Start believing in yourself and how people experience you, especially when it's a positive. Finally, the easy bit, how to receive feedback. Tennis is a game, and if someone hits the ball to you, there is no game if you don't hit the ball back. Simple. Life is a bit like this. If someone gives you feedback or tells you what to do, say, thank you. That's it. Thank you. Nice and clearly. Nothing else required. Practice this and you will eventually get how powerful it is. It works, I can assure you. What you do after that, I've already told you, and it is up to you. Remember, feedback is free and a very powerful tool at your disposal. Use it or lose it. Reject it at your peril. Feedback is a part of listening, and listening is what the next video will cover. Bye for now.